On Monday, October 4th, 2004, at around 5:30 a.m., Joe O'Reilly left the family home, Lambview, to head to his job at Viacom Outdoor Advertising on the Bluebell Industrial Estate, where he worked as an account manager. He left behind his wife of 13 years, Rachel, and their 2 sons, aged 2 and 4. Later that morning, Joe sent Rachel a message asking if she and the boys had slept well and requested she wish Jackie a happy birthday for him. He signed off with kiss, 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 but received no response. Joe then left several voicemails between 11:52 a.m. and 1:45 p.m. At 1:15 p.m., Joe was contacted by their son's daycare, who informed him that Rachel had not picked him up at the usual time of 12:30 p.m. Joe called Rachel's phone and left a message asking if someone else had been assigned to pick their son up. He called again at 1:24 p.m., expressing concern and asking her to call him back. Still, there was no reply from Rachel. Joe decided to go pick up his children and called his mother-in-law, Rose Calloway, to inform her that he hadn't heard from Rachel all morning and that his attempts to reach her on both her mobile and the home phone had failed. He asked Rose to check on Rachel at the house while he went to collect the kids. Joe then called Rachel's phone again while driving on the motorway, telling her he had spoken to Rose, who also hadn't heard from her, and urged Rachel to call him back. He also phoned Rachel's younger brother, Anthony, to tell him about the situation and that Rachel hadn't gone to the creche to pick up their son as expected. Family members continued to call both the home phone and her mobile, but all calls went unanswered. Rose began to suspect that something was seriously wrong. This was not like Rachel, so she set off to check on her daughter. When she pulled up at the bungalow, she immediately had a sense of relief as Rachel's car was in the driveway. The patio door was open. The house was silent. Some of the kitchen drawers were open and items were scattered across the floor. In the living room, the videos were all dumped in a pile. It looked as though the house had been ransacked. She then went to Rachel and Joe's bedroom. Rose found her daughter's lifeless body. She was lying on her back in a pool of blood, with the upper half of her body twisted. There was so much congealed blood that Rose said she was unable to determine if her daughter's face was on its side or if she was face down. Blood covered the walls, the ceiling, and there was even blood spatter in the bathroom. When she touched her, she said Rachel was as cold as marble, and neighbors said she heard Rose screaming. Rose ran to her bag to get her phone and call the police. She then called one of her sons, Declan, to tell him the horrifying news. Declan said he was going to come to the house, and so was Jim, Rose's husband. Joe got to the house at 2:30 with the children, and Rose told him she had found Rachel's body. He ran into the house shouting her name. When he came to her body, he said, "Jesus, Rachel, what did you do?" Rachel's best friend Jackie was a nurse and she went to the house. She too checked Rachel and confirmed there was no pulse and she wasn't breathing. Rachel's father, Jim, soon arrived, but was told by a police officer to not go inside, as the scene was too horrific. When the first police officer got to the scene, Joe went up to them in the garden and said he had been in the house and touched Rachel's body to check for a pulse, and said that he had moved a box near to where her body lay into the boys' room. He said he hoped he hadn't destroyed any evidence. When Joe was spoken to by the police, he had an alibi. He said he had been at a bus depot in Broadstone, and it seemed unlikely that he would have been able to travel all that way to the house and back in the time frame given. So who would have wanted Rachel dead and why? Rachel Calloway had been adopted as a baby, as had her 4 other siblings, by their parents, Jim and Rose. The family was incredibly close. Rachel always made time to catch up with her parents and siblings, her 3 brothers, Anthony, Declan, and Paul, and her sister Anne. Rachel was athletic and played softball, even holding a softball world record. She was described as a live wire and someone with a really good heart. Rose referred to her as a brilliant ray of sunshine who was well behaved as a child, but also adventurous, throwing herself into everything she could. Her father, Jim, said that she was someone who would give anything a go and loved being independent, with a knack for DIY and decorating. When she was 17, she met Joe O'Reilly, who was 2 years older than her, while they worked at the same department store. He said the first thing he noticed about her was her height. Rachel stood at 5'11" and Joe was 6'5". He had asked her to go on a date with him several times, and she turned him down. But Joe continued to ask. Joe overheard that she played softball and one day turned up at her practice session and joined her team. They were both successful and even had the potential to turn pro. Their relationship then became a romantic one. At the top of the Eiffel Tower, Joe asked Rachel to marry him, and a couple of years later the pair were wed. They then welcomed 2 sons. They moved to their new house, a bungalow called Lambay View, in Norrell in 2003. It was the perfect place to raise their children. Rachel loved being a mother and everything she did was for her 2 boys. Joe O'Reilly had also come from a close family, with him being the second eldest of 2 boys and 2 girls. But his circumstances were different. When he was young, the marriage between his parents had fallen apart, and his father had left the country and moved to England. Joe was described as an incredibly confident man, and he was determined to get ahead in the advertising industry, despite not having the qualifications. He was so persuasive and confident with clients that his lack of credentials didn't appear to matter. He would get into work early and leave late, determined to make his goals come to fruition. When they moved into their 3-bedroom bungalow, Rose did have some concerns. She was worried that Rachel would be lonely living there, as Joe was away from home so much with work. But Rachel seemed to be delighted with the move. She became well known in the area as she sold Avon and Tupperware, and within a few weeks of moving in, she held a barbecue so she could meet and get to know her new neighbors. In spite of wanting to appear to be a family man, some of Rachel's friends said Joe was more of an absent father, and Rachel was left to do a significant amount of the parenting on her own. He would always leave the house early in order to go to the gym, and often wouldn't be back until well into the evening. Rachel was more of a private person who didn't talk about her marital problems, but some could sense there might be issues between the 2 of them. The now retired Detective Inspector Pat Murray was then a detective sergeant at Balbrigg and Garda Station. When he arrived on scene, as he was a qualified scene of crime examiner with plenty of experience under his belt, he went in to see exactly what they were dealing with. In all his years in the police, he was shocked by just how brutal this killing had been. It's a sight I will never forget. My God, she was pulverized. Her hair was matted in blood. You could see down to her skull. You could see there was severe force used to inflict that. So the poor woman had no chance whatsoever, absolutely none. It was savage, cold, just unbelievable. Her father Jim said that Rachel would have fought for her life with everything she had, and he believed that the killer had attacked her from behind. Although it had initially appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, one thing immediately stood out. There was money in the home that hadn't been taken. 800 euros in a box in the kitchen and 400 euros in Rachel's bag. Based on what he found, Pat didn't believe that this was a random attack carried out by a stranger. It's highly unusual to see someone in the state I saw Rachel O'Reilly having administered such a beating. The viciousness of the assault was a pure display of hate for this woman. If you hate someone that much, you're going to know them. Pat Mary believed the robbery had been staged. They set up an incident room back at the station, and more than 40 officers were sent out to conduct door-to-door inquiries and search the local area to try and uncover any potential clues. Gardeep carrying out a preliminary investigation outside the house where the remains of a mother of 2 were found this afternoon. News soon began to spread that a brutal murder had been committed. People were stunned. Based on the scene of the crime, the police believed she had been caught totally off guard by the attack. Searches were carried out to try and find the murder weapon, but they proved fruitless. But the searches did uncover something interesting. Half a mile away from the house, a plastic bag was found containing jewelry and a camera, 2 items that Joe had said were missing. It was looking less and less like a burglary. Joe was questioned that evening. He said he left for work as normal and headed to the gym beforehand. He was seen on CCTV leaving work at 8 o'clock and 7 seconds a.m. and he said he was going to a bus depot in Broadstone, and his colleague Derek Corney said he would meet him there. Part of Joe's job was checking the advertisements on the side of buses, so he would have to travel around. At 8:45, Derek set off, and when he got to the depot, he called Joe to ask him whereabouts he was. Joe said he was in another part of the depot. Derek was questioned, and he confirmed he had spoken to Joe on the phone when he got to the depot, and he had been told that he was there, just in a different part of the site. When he first made that statement, Derek was unaware that Rachel had been murdered. When he questioned Joe, Pat asked if there was anyone who was known to not like Rachel, or maybe if she had been seeing someone else romantically. What Joe said left Pat confused. Joe replied, "No, neither of us were having an affair." Pat hadn't asked if Joe was having an affair, so why had he felt the need to clarify he hadn't been? But then the truth came out. Joe had been unfaithful, telling Pat, "It's over now. I don't want anyone to know." He said he had had a brief fling with a woman called Nikki Pelly, and it hadn't been a serious relationship. He had told Rachel 3 times that he hadn't been having an affair. He said that the couple had had an argument the day before she was killed, and he had slept in the spare room. The day after Rachel was found, Nikki was questioned by the police. She confirmed what Joe had said. There had been a relationship, but it wasn't a serious one. The same day the police received the results of Rachel's post-mortem, it revealed that she had been bludgeoned with a heavy object, such as a dumbbell. This was one of the items that Joe had said was missing from the property. Her skull had been fractured in 2 places, and her face, shoulders, and neck had multiple lacerations. Defensive wounds on her arms showed that she had made an attempt to fight off her attacker. It was determined that she had been struck between 6 and 9 times. Blood was also found in her airways, which would have made it very difficult for her to breathe. A couple of days after the murder, a search of Joe's office at work was carried out and his laptop was seized. A series of emails had been deleted, but the police recovered them. Joe had been talking to his sister and about their marriage, in which he revealed his deep hatred for Rachel, using vulgar language and expletives to refer to her, even saying that she repulsed him. When the emails that had been so derogatory about Rachel came to light, Rose said the family was bereft that any person could be spoken about in such an appalling manner. News of the marital problems was a massive shock to Rose too, who said he was a loner. He was very strange. I never thought, though, there was anything bad about him. I thought he was a very good husband and a very good father. At family gatherings, he would tend to break off from the adults, and nobody really knew a lot about him. The house was cordoned off for 9 days, giving the scene of crime investigators the chance to thoroughly go through and document everything. Whilst the investigation continued, the family prepared for her burial. They all decided to write letters that were to be put into the coffin with her when she was buried. The family left Joe with the undertaker to say some private words to his wife, and when one of them went back in, Joe said, "You can put the lid on it now," with Jim saying it sounded like he was talking about a tin box, not his wife's coffin. Her parents felt these were very strange and detached comments for an allegedly traumatized widower to make. Her family then gathered for her funeral. Following the burial, her parents received the cards that were attached to the flowers that people had left, and one of them stood out. All Joe's card said was, "See you later, Joe." Joe's behavior had become increasingly strange and unusual. The police had told him he could now go back into the house, and he needed to go through everything and make a note of anything he thought had been stolen. He reiterated what he had said. Some of her jewelry, a camera, and 2 towels were gone, as well as one of the dumbbells, but the jewelry and the camera had now been accounted for. He also decided to invite Rose and Jim over, even though the house hadn't been cleaned, and it still had their daughter's blood everywhere. He said that there was a sense of peace and that it would be good for them to visit. Rose didn't want to go back into the house, but Jim said that if it had helped Joe process what had happened, maybe it could help them. To their shock, Joe began reenacting the murder and speculating as to how she had been bludgeoned, even pointing to the blood spatter on the ceiling. He showed them the blood on the walls, adding that he thought maybe the killer had stepped over her body and then cleaned up in the bathroom whilst listening to Rachel as she choked on her own blood, and that the killer had gone back into the room to finish her off. When they went back downstairs, Joe was adamant that they listened to the voicemails he had left for her that day. Rose said she could hear Rachel's voice in her head saying, "He did it." Later that night, Rose spoke to Jim about what she was feeling. Jim was distraught and asked her not to talk to anyone else, saying that people reacted to grief in different ways, and that Joe was just behaving as if he was in shock, because he was so cool and calm. I couldn't speak to Jim about it after that because he would get so upset, but I said I'm not going to say it to you again, but I'm just asking you to be open-minded. Joe also started speaking to the media. He said the family were worried that the killer could possibly strike again, and he went on television to appeal for information. Journalist Jenny Friel interviewed Joe at the house, and before long, he asked her if she wanted to see the bedroom Rachel had been murdered in. She said this took her by surprise, and when he pointed out where the blood had been and where she was found, Jenny said that although she was not squeamish about most things, this made her feel sick. Another journalist, Kieran O'Brien, went to the house 12 days after the murder and took photographs, including one of Joe sitting in his kitchen. Joe said that the police were treating him as a suspect. Kieran asked him if he believed he was a suspect. Joe said yes. Kieran said that he had never had an encounter like that in his whole career. People from within the community and the couple's friendship circles called Joe to offer their condolences and asked if there was anything they could do to help. He would offer to show them the scene of the crime and what he thought had happened, something that was later referred to as the murder tours. On October 22nd, Joe appeared alongside Rose as a guest on The Late Late Show with Pat Kenny, the primetime talk show in Ireland. Joe's behavior backstage set alarm bells ringing. Pat Murray spoke to the staff who worked on the show, and they said he didn't appear to be a man who was grieving. He helped himself to food and refreshments and spent most of his time on his phone, whereas Jim and Rose couldn't even look at a cup of tea. Joe's appearance did nothing to stop people's ever-growing suspicions. And what follows is a clip from that episode. The show had offered to put him up in a hotel, but he had said he had to go and meet a client. But this was a lie. He instead went and visited his lover, Nikki. He was on the television to appeal for information about the murder of his wife, and he spent the night with the woman he had been having an affair with. When news of the affair broke in the media, the interest only increased. Journalist Jenny Freeland said that, looking back over her notes from the interview with him, he hadn't actually mentioned loving his wife or how much he would miss her. He spoke about how devastated the children were, but nothing about his feelings about it. Despite Joe and Nikki's efforts to play down their relationship, it was becoming clear that this had been a long-term affair over several months. They had met whilst working at the Viacom advertising agency. After going for a night out at a pub, they swapped email addresses and mobile phone numbers to keep in contact. He would tell Rachel he was away for work, and he would instead go and see Nikki. They spoke on the phone every day and would meet each other 2 times a week, all while he vehemently denied any affair to Rachel. 6 weeks after Rachel was murdered, 2 arrests were made. Nikki Pelly was taken into custody for withholding information, and Derek, the colleague who had given Joe his alibi, was also arrested. When Derek was interviewed, he said he couldn't be too sure about the timings, and that they could be off by 40 minutes. Nikki also had a different version of events to the one she had previously given. She admitted that their relationship was far more serious than she had initially said, and that Joe had asked her to play it down to the police. Both were released without charge. The next day, Joe O'Reilly was taken into custody. He refused to answer questions, offering no comment throughout. The police had no murder weapon or forensic evidence. They did have CCTV footage showing a car similar to his in the area at the time, but the number plate could not be made out. As a result, 2 days later, he too was released without charge. The family then asked the police if the letter Joe had put into Rachel's coffin could be looked at, believing he had maybe written something incriminating on it. An exhumation order was granted. March 8, 2005. Rachel's body was exhumed, and Joe's letter was removed. It was chemically treated, and using infrared technology, they could finally read what he had said. It was 5 pages and included the following. This solidified their belief that he was guilty. In December 2005, 14 months after the murder, the police were still trying to build their case. The car that had been spotted on the CCTV footage appeared to be the same make and model as Joe's, a blue Fiat Mirai. Despite having the footage enhanced, it still didn't clearly show the license plate. So the officers devised a plan to prove that it was Joe's car on the footage and nobody else's. They searched the database for all other Fiat Mirai drivers in the country, and it came back with 2,500 matches. Although they could not eliminate every single driver of that car in Ireland, they were able to rule out enough that it made it far more likely that it was Joe's car. The police also contacted O2 to see if they had any recordings of calls that Joe had made on the day his wife had been murdered. Whilst they couldn't provide that, they did have something interesting. They brought in an engineer from France, and he was able to determine which masts Joe's phone had been close to throughout the day. They were then able to plot his whole route. And the more the police looked into where his phone had been, the more damning it became. At 5:45 that morning, Joe had left to go to the gym located on the outskirts of the city, where he was due to meet Derek. He went to the petrol station and filled up his Fiat Maria. Whilst there, he received a call from Nikki. This was the first of 8 calls that day, and they stayed on the phone for 28 minutes. Something else he had failed to mention. He went to the gym where he had a shower before heading to work. He sent an email to another colleague, Kieran, where he said that his phone would be out of service for the majority of the morning, and he arranged to meet him at 2 p.m. Despite him telling Derek that he was in another part of the depot, analysis of Joe's phone showed he had actually been headed in the direction of his family home. Whilst his phone was out by the house, Joe didn't make a call or text, but he had got a call from Derek at 9:25 and a text from a different colleague at 9:52. The phone had pinged off of a tower at Murphy's Quarry. This was the nearest mast to the house, and the quarry could even be seen from the property. The car that the police believed was Joe's was caught on CCTV passing the quarry. If Joe was at Broadstone, where he had told police he was, why therefore was his phone pinging off of the Murphy's Quarry mast, less than a mile away from his home? As Joe had made it clear he always had his phone with him, this added to the weight of their case. At 9:59, the car was seen going past the quarry again, driving away from the home. It was only after this that the phone was placed in Broadstone, somewhere he said he had been all morning. At 9 a.m., Rachel had left with the 2 boys to take them to the creche and school, and 3 minutes later CCTV filmed her passing the quarry too. The same camera showed her coming back at 9:41 a.m. It was believed she was murdered shortly after arriving home. When the texts were sent to Rachel asking if she had slept okay, the police checked the corresponding time on the CCTV cameras, and these also picked up a blue Fiat Marea being driven 10 minutes after the text had been sent. They drove the route from where the text had been sent from to the CCTV camera, and it took about 10 minutes. Joe arrived back at the office at roughly 12 o'clock. When he arrived back at work, something stood out to one of his colleagues. She noticed that he appeared to be a bit flushed and red in the face, and it looked as though he had been crying. She asked him if everything was okay, and he said it was. She told him that he looked terrible, and he immediately panicked and sped off towards his office. He stayed there until the call came in that Rachel had failed to pick their son up from the creche. When Nikki had been released without charge, it emerged that she had told a friend it was hard to continue to lie to the police. Nikki told her that Joe had said if he killed Rachel he could get away with it. She was brought back in for questioning, and she admitted that he had said this, but she said she didn't believe he was being serious. The police later found out that Rachel had told a friend about a huge argument she had had with Joe. She had told him he needed to change his behavior or leave. It also emerged that just 4 months before Rachel had been killed, social services had received an anonymous tip, alleging that Rachel was not fit to be a mother. The claims were absolutely unfounded. Joe and his sister emailed back and forth about the incident with social services, and used various swear words to refer to Rachel and asked how she had got out of this one. Joe replied saying that social services confirmed what he had thought. If they were to divorce, he likely wouldn't get full custody and be able to cut Rachel out of the picture. In March 2006, Derek Corney was brought in by police and questioned. During one of the interviews, due to the stress, Derek actually vomited into a bin in the corner of the room. He then said that the statement he had made previously couldn't have been correct, and that the timings could be wrong. Joe was arrested for a second time. Pat Murray was hopeful that they now had enough to charge him, based on all of the phone analysis and how this tied to the CCTV footage, as well as the elimination of the other drivers of the same car. But the director of public prosecutions said they needed more. Pat Murray recalled how Joe had put his thumb up to him when leaving, and how he didn't seem to care at all about the seriousness of the situation or what had happened. On the 2nd anniversary of Rachel's murder, her family held a mass for her. It was held outside Lambview, but the children did not attend, and neither did Joe. Analysis of mobile phone data revealed more damning evidence. Joe's phone had pinged off of a mast close to the family home when Rachel's murder had taken place. contradicting his statement that he had been at work miles away at a depot. And the more the police looked into where his phone had been, the more damning it became. The evidence was finally enough. October 2006. Police arrived at Joe's mother's house. Pat Murray went into the kitchen, put his hand on Joe's shoulder, and told him he was under arrest for the murder of Rachel. He said, "He turned and faced me. The blood drained from his face and he went white as a sheet. He was not expecting it. He entered a plea of not guilty." June 25, 2007, Joe O'Reilly went on trial. The media and public interest was unprecedented. Queues formed every day as people tried to get into the public gallery to watch the trial. Rachel's family had not seen him in 8 months, so coming face to face with him again at the court was an especially painful experience. Jim said he had a fierce arrogance, and Rose described him as detached. The defense argued that the prosecution had based their case on innuendo, spin, and allegation, and that it was nothing more than circumstantial. But what came out showed that the image Joe had been desperately trying to uphold, that of being a happily married family man, was nothing but a lie. The evidence was strong. The phone analysis, the emails insulting his wife, him lying about where he was, the downplaying of the affair, and his behavior after the fact painted a damning picture. The emails and texts between Nikki and Joe were presented to the court and showed that they had planned to start a life together. The texts that had been exchanged revealed that Joe often told Nikki he loved her, and he would imply that the boys were her children, referring to one of them as our boy. This was providing a motive for wanting Rachel out of the picture. He had attempted to tarnish her character, calling her a lazy mother who was heavy-handed with the children. It also inadvertently came out that the one who had made the anonymous report to social services containing the allegations that were determined to be utterly unfounded was Joe's own mother. The court was stunned by these revelations. Throughout the trial, Joe kept his head down, looking firmly at the floor, showing no emotion. On the occasions he did look up, it was to talk to his lawyers whilst he laughed and joked. It was put to the court that at 9:45 Rachel had arrived home and Joe, her husband of 13 years and the father of her children, was lying in wait for her in the bedroom. When she went in, he launched his attack, bludgeoning her repeatedly. After beating her, it's thought that he took a shower to wash the blood off before putting his clothes and towels into the washing machine. He then attempted to ransack the place and make it look as though they had been broken into. He then went and put the allegedly stolen items into a bag and dropped them by the stream. When the Kresha contacted him to say that Rachel hadn't arrived to pick their son up, Joe stalled and spent more time there than necessary. All of this was to ensure that Rose would be the one to find her daughter's body. The testimony of pathologist Professor Marie Cassidy, the former state pathologist of Ireland, also showed that when Joe had reenacted the murder, including how the killer had likely heard her gurgling and choking on her own blood and then gone back to strike her again, he had been telling the truth. The court also heard from Fiona Slevin. She had testified about a conversation she had had with Joe on the same day Rachel's funeral was held. She said he had told her, "I don't know why they're looking in the fields. The murder weapon is in the water." She added it was like he said something he shouldn't have. She told the court he then said, "Well, if I did it, that's where it would be. There's water all around. That would get rid of all the DNA." On the 11th day of the trial, the phone triangulation was put to the court. It showed how his phone had been tracked all the way to the vicinity of his house when he said he was at the bus depot on the morning of Rachel's murder. It was a groundbreaking set of evidence. Never before had a murder trial used mobile phone triangulation in this way, or to such an extent. And 2 days later, more shocking evidence came to light. The emails were read to the court. On 14th day of the trial, Nikki Pelly testified. The way Joe had courted the media painted a picture of a cold individual who was desperate to control the narrative. Joe had convinced Rose to go on the Late Late Show, saying it was the police who believed it was a good idea. The opposite was true. Joe had been told to disengage and not talk to the media anymore. One of Rachel's brothers would later say he liked that feeling. He enjoyed people's reactions. "In my head, it's not human, not normal. But that's the way he is. I honestly believe he is a psychopath." July 21, 2007. The jury returned their verdict. At the Central Criminal Court, Joe O'Reilly was found guilty of murder. He was given a life sentence. Joe O'Reilly attempted to bring his case to the Court of Appeal, but was unsuccessful. Following this, he tried to take it to the Supreme Court. This was also refused in November 2016. It was also reported that he had abandoned plans to take his appeal to the European courts. In May 2015, an appeal lodged by Joe to have his conviction declared a miscarriage of justice was refused. He has been refused parole at least 3 times, and Rachel's family will continue to fight to ensure that he remains in prison. In 2012, Joe's brother Derek said that Nikki still loved Joe and was standing by him, believing that he was innocent, as did he. "The Joe I know was not a scumbag," he said. "He is most definitely not a wife beater, and he most definitely isn't a devil. The Joe O'Reilly I know is anything but the ultimate evil. I've never had any reason to doubt him." Nikki Pelly continued to visit him weekly in prison, believing in his innocence. It was reported in 2022 that Joe and Nikki had ended their relationship for a second time, with the first time being in 2017. Sources say they remain close and best friends. More tragedy would hit the Calloway family when in 2010, Rose and Jim's other daughter passed away at the age of 31, following a battle with cancer, with just 2 weeks between her passing and the anniversary of Rachel's death. Rose described how deeply affected and was by her sister's death. "As soon as our Rachel died, and used to arrive up at the door at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. She was petrified and she was afraid of him. She never rested. She always thought she could hear noises, someone trying to get in." For those left behind, life after Rachel's murder has been a painful journey to navigate. Rose published a book about her daughter's case titled Remembering Rachel, the story of Rachel O'Reilly's life and brutal death. She said, "I don't want anyone to ever forget what was done to Rachel in any shape or form." The tragedy of this case is perhaps best summarized by the words of her mother. "Rose, I'd love her to be remembered as this bubbly person that we had for such a short time that touched everybody's hearts. I wish I could go back. I'd give anything to be able to hold her, even just for 1 minute." Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. In 1976, Yoon Sang-ae lived in Seoul, South Korea, with her parents, identical twin sister, and older brother. In June of that year, her grandmother came to visit from her home in the countryside. One day, she took the twins to Namdaemun Market. Unfamiliar with the bustling city, the grandmother became disoriented and lost her sense of direction. In her confusion, she lost track of the 2 girls. With the help of the police, the family launched an extensive search for the twins. 3 days after they went missing, one of the girls, Yoon Sang-hee, was found in Seoul, but Sang-ae was still nowhere to be found. The family continued their search, putting up flyers, appearing on television to appeal for help, and visiting orphanages across Seoul in case Sang-ae had been found and taken there. Despite all their efforts, Sang-ae remained missing. Eventually, the family opened a clothing store in the very market where Sang-ae had disappeared, hoping she would return to the area where she was last seen. Lee Young-sun, Sang-ae's mother, would look at every child who passed by the store, checking to see if they were her lost daughter. As an adult, Sang-ae's older brother, Yoon Sang-myung, opened a lottery ticket shop, also in the same market. Sang-ae's entire family was distraught over her disappearance, but it took the most serious toll on her father. He withdrew from the rest of his family, barely speaking to his wife, and developed a serious drinking problem as a result of the loss of his daughter. His drinking eventually resulted him developing severe liver disease, which he died of in 2000. His final words were about his missing daughter. "She was the dearest." In 2017, Lee Young-san went to the police to have a sample of DNA taken in hopes that it would somehow help her find her daughter, whom she still believed was alive even more than 40 years after her disappearance. In 2020, she received a phone call from the police informing her that her DNA had matched with a woman living in the United States and that they believed that this woman was Sang-ae, but further testing would be required to confirm her identity. The woman was Denise McCarty of Springfield, Vermont. She had been adopted from South Korea on Christmas Eve of 1976. Her family had been told by the agency she was adopted through that she had been abandoned at a hospital in the city of Suwon, approximately 20 miles south of Seoul, because she had been sick. Denise visited South Korea in 2016, and during her trip, she submitted a DNA sample as a part of a new government program designed to help adoptees find their birth families. The program had been expanded in January of 2020, allowing adoptees to undergo DNA testing at any South Korean mission around the world, rather than requiring them to travel to South Korea to do so. Denise was able to visit the Korean Consulate General Office in Boston to submit her DNA for the additional tests, which confirmed on September 25, 2020, that she was Yoon Sang-hai. Due to the pandemic, Denise was unable to meet with her birth family in person, but she was reunited with her mother, twin sister, and brother over a video call with the assistance of an interpreter on October 14, 2020, more than 44 years after her disappearance. Denise's grandmother had also passed away since she went missing, but Denise felt as though she, as well as her birth father, were there with the rest of the family for their reunion in spirit. During the call, Yoon Sang-hee told her sister that they all loved her and had never abandoned her. Rather, they had spent every day looking for her. Lee Yong-sun showed her the paperwork that still formally lists her as her daughter in Korea. While it is still unclear how she ended up so far away from where she went missing and who brought her to the hospital in Suwon, Denise is happy to have a better understanding of where she came from. Furthermore, as an adoptee, growing up with family members who did not look like her, she was amazed to see her mother and brother, who share a physical resemblance with her, and her identical twin, who looks just like her. She was also shocked to hear her sister speak in a voice that sounds just like hers and learn that their similarities extend even to things like their tastes in color and foods. I can't describe how happy I am. I feel like dancing all the time. Sleepless nights thick with grief are gone now. I am so happy and I can't wait to see her in person, Lee Young-seon told the Korea Times after her video reunion with Denise. She is grateful to the family that adopted her for raising her so well and looks forward to meeting them one day so that she can thank them in person. Denise feels fortunate to have such a large family that loves her, related to her through both blood and adoption. I've just got this huge family now that loves me and that I love, she told her local news station. You can't be happier than that. You can't ask for more than that. She hopes to be able to reunite with her birth family once travel restrictions are lifted and plans for her adoptive family to join her so that both sides of her family can meet each other. Denise is beginning to learn Korean and Sang he is learning English in an effort to eliminate the language barrier that currently limits the communication between Denise and her biological family. For now, the family stays in contact through an app that translates their messages to each other for them. 54-year-old Michael Anthony Lynch, who went by Tony, was a married father of 4 young children. In late 2001, he left his home in Maghervilly in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland and moved into an apartment in Clones in Western County Monaghan in Republic of Ireland for work. He was reported missing 2 months later in January of 2002 when he stopped reporting to work. The ensuing investigation found that the last sighting of Tony had occurred on January 6, 2002 on Fermanagh Street in Clones, several days before he was reported missing. When Tony's wife Angela went to the apartment he had been staying in, everything he owned appeared to still be there. It seemed to her that he ran out on a brief errand and simply never returned. Few clues were found in the ensuing years. In April of 2016, a man reported a possible sighting of Tony believing a hitchhiker he had given a ride to could have been the missing man. However, nothing ever came of this tip. In January of 2020, around 18th anniversary of Tony's disappearance, authorities announced a renewed effort in the case. Tony's car, a white Mitsubishi Galant, had gone missing with him and had never been located. This led authorities to hypothesize that Tony had ended up in a body of water while driving and had never been found because he and his vehicle could not be seen from the surface. They hoped that advances in drone and sonar technology that had been made in the almost 2 decades since Tony vanished would help locate him and his vehicle. They also made a renewed appeal to the public for information in the case. Because Tony disappeared so close to the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, both the Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Gardaí were involved in the search. Civil defense from multiple counties also participated. The new searches began with a 2-week search of 16 lakes and flooded quarries near Clones in early January. No sign of Tony was found. Similar searches throughout the area were planned for throughout the rest of 2020, but they had to be suspended in March due to the pandemic without finding Tony or his car. However, the appeal to the public would ultimately result in answers in Tony's case. On May 18, 2020, a fisherman noticed an anomaly with his sonar equipment while he was out on Upper Lake Earn in County Fermanagh. He believed it was some sort of large submerged object and was aware that authorities had been looking for a submerged vehicle as a part of a missing persons investigation. He notified the Clones Garda station of what he had found. An underwater search was underway by 2 o'clock that afternoon and identified the object as a submerged vehicle. It was pulled from the water and found to be Tony Lynch's Mitsubishi Galant. Human remains were inside of it. DNA would later confirm that they belonged to Tony Lynch. His remains were returned to the Lynch family, and they were finally able to provide him with a proper burial. It was nice once Dad was found again. Then everybody wanted to talk to you about him. And it's great that now there is a grave to go to. I never thought we'd have that. Tony's son Peter said on December 2, 2020, Ireland's 8th National Missing Persons Day. Peter also said that his family cannot thank the fisherman who called in what he had seen with his sonar equipment enough, and that they wish that their story and its eventual resolution will inspire hope in other families of people who have gone missing, who do not yet have answers about what became of their loved one. Jerry Hibert was reported missing on August 4, 2003. It was believed at the time that he had walked from his home in Charleston, West Virginia, to a nearby bus station with plans to visit his son in Cambridge, Ohio, approximately 130 miles north of Charleston. He never arrived there. His family was immediately concerned as the 64-year-old was beginning to suffer from dementia. Little progress was made in the case over the years despite the best efforts of Jerry's family, whose efforts were largely focused on searching for him in Ohio, where he was believed to be traveling. Jerry's case would finally be solved thanks to the efforts of a volunteer 17 years he went missing. Patty Williams Childress is a retired social worker who now devotes her time to investigating missing persons cases and unidentified remains through various volunteer organizations and websites, including the DNA Doe Project. In the summer of 2020, Who Are You Doe? A Facebook group dedicated to researching cases involving unidentified remains posted the story of a John Doe found in Kingsport, Tennessee in August of 2003. On August 11th, a woman had been riding her bicycle through Riverfront Park when she noticed something unusual in the Holston River, which police confirmed to be human remains. There was no identification found with them, just a bank envelope in the pocket of the pair of pants found with them containing $267. The remains were too badly decomposed due to their time in the water for them to be useful in their identification on their own. A clay model forensic rendering of the deceased man's face was commissioned to help with his identification. Various leads were followed up on over the ensuing years. A forensic drawing was also created in 2018. However, the man found in the river was unidentified 17 years later when his story and the forensic artistic renderings were shared in the Facebook group and attracted Patty's attention. Normally, Patty limited her research to within a 25-mile radius of where an unidentified person was found, but the bank envelope told her that she would need to expand her search. The envelope had been from BB&T Bank, which did not have any locations in Kingsport in 2003, meaning the man was not from the immediate area. She found Jerry's case through another site she was active with and informed police in Kingsport of similarities between him and their John Doe. They agreed that the remains could potentially be Jerry's and began investigating this lead. They then spoke with a relative of Jerry's back in West Virginia and obtained a DNA sample from them to compare to the DNA of their John Doe. In early August of 2020, near 17th anniversary of Jerry's disappearance, police announced that DNA testing had confirmed that the remains found in the Holston River belonged to Jerry Hibert. Jerry's daughter, Misty, told WSAZ News that she had been holding on to hope of finding her father alive. She was grateful, however, to finally have answers about what happened to her father. She contacted Patty Williams Childress to personally express the gratitude she and her family feel for the work she did to finally bring resolution to the case. It is not known exactly what brought Jerry to Kingsport, which is in the opposite direction of where he was planning to go in Ohio, but his family believes that he must gotten onto the wrong bus as a result of his dementia. Police do not believe that foul play is involved in the case. Gretchen had relocated to Florida in 2006, but prior to that, she had spent considerable time in the fast-paced New York City, where she attended fashion school. Later, she returned to her hometown in New Jersey, earned another degree, and began her career as a teacher. However, as soon as she arrived in Florida, she felt it was the place for her. The sun, the beaches, the community, everything was perfect, and she quickly settled in. She soon transitioned into a role as a human resources director, referring to her colleagues as her second family. Friends described Gretchen as outgoing, confident, and a real chatterbox. Her job, which involved meeting new people every day, was a perfect fit for her. She also had a 12-year-old daughter, Ava, who lived part-time with her and part-time with her ex-husband, Jeff. Staying active and working out was a big part of Gretchen's life, and one of the reasons she loved living in Florida was the opportunity to paddleboard and work out on the beach. After her divorce and career shift, she dedicated herself even more to fitness. In her search for a personal trainer to push her further, she met David Anthony. Colleagues said David had a commanding presence, both in personality and stature, standing at 6 feet 7 inches. He was charming, popular, and had a great sense of humor. Clients often referred to him as the hot trainer, and the gym's owner, Tabitha, said that people quickly warmed to him. Gretchen and David had much in common, especially their shared love for staying active. But most importantly for Gretchen, he got along brilliantly with Ava. Gretchen and David soon married in Las Vegas in March of 2015. But the happiness was not to last, when in late 2019, after a string of issues that Gretchen said they simply couldn't work through, they had separated and divorce papers were filed in February 2020. David moved in with his mother, and Gretchen was now by herself, as Ava was staying with Jeff for a while. If this wasn't all stressful enough, more anxiety would soon follow. March 2020, a month and year many will remember forever. The COVID-19 pandemic saw just about everything come to a grinding halt, and the fear of the unknown was lingering over everyone. As the lockdowns had just come into effect, Gretchen, like many, was on social media more than ever. She was still working but was now virtually catching up with friends and family, asking for TV show and film recommendations, and seeing how everyone else was filling their days up. She was often reposting and commenting on everything from inspirational quotes to memes and jokes. On March 19th, just a few days into everything shutting down, Gretchen reposted a picture which said, "When chaos is all around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within you." The following day, she popped into work and everyone said she was in good spirits. She had plans the next day to catch up with a friend, and all seemed to be as well as it could be considering the circumstances. But on March 21st, everyone was met with silence. There was nothing on her social media and she had failed to clock into her shift. A few friends then got some concerning texts from Gretchen. She said she had an acute case of COVID-19 and wasn't doing so well. Dawn, Gretchen's boss, and her close friend heard she was sick and sent her a message. She heard nothing back. Dawn texted her on Monday morning, March 23rd, "Gretchen, are you okay?" At the end of the day, when she still hadn't heard anything back, she texted again. "Hi, please let me know if you need something. I'm really worried about you." She got a reply and it was far more serious than Dawn thought. The message said she had gone to Jupiter Medical Center where she passed out with a fever of 102 degrees and low oxygen levels. So at the CDC coronavirus treatment facility that only handles COVID cases, the good news is my blood type has potential to be used in the cure. Not sure if you remember me saying that I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is significant in gathering more answers to find a cure. For safety purposes, Dr. Sinclair and her team are strongly recommending that we maintain contact with immediate family members only. I'm using my mom. She said she was being transferred to Belle Glade, over an hour away from Central Florida. Her friends were concerned but also confident that Gretchen was fit and healthy and would be able to fight it off. Gretchen's ex-husband Jeff and Ava had also both received some text messages. These said that she may even have to be placed in a medically induced coma, making her impossible to get hold of. The texts to her daughter were cold and distant, and Jeff said the minute he read these he knew something was wrong. The messages were full of spelling mistakes, abbreviations she wouldn't use, and bad punctuation. And this just wasn't how she talked. The messages were now coming in thick and fast, saying many different things, but all indicating she was in a very bad way. Some friends were fearing it was a life or death situation, but others thought the same as Jeff. Something was off. More concerning still, her phone had stopped sharing her location with her daughter, something she had never done. After this, with the concern mounting and so many mixed messages about where she was and what was happening, the police were called to do a welfare check. There was no answer at the door. Jeff decided to go to the Jupiter Medical Center himself. And to his surprise, he did find Gretchen's Mini Cooper parked outside, with her purse on the front seat in full view of the passersby. Again, something that didn't make sense. He called in and asked about Gretchen's status, and the response confirmed his fears. Gretchen wasn't there, and they had no record of her on the system. Nothing since 2008. On the March 26, 2020, a missing persons report was filed and Detective Jared Kennison was in charge. Based off of everything he had heard, he had big concerns. He got a warrant to enter her home, and it seemed to indicate a struggle of some sort had taken place. There was a broken picture frame and shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, 2 bottles of cleaning products next to a cloth on her kitchen countertop, and inside the washing machine were more towels that had a red substance on them. These were taken away for testing. Police also found small drops of what looked like blood on the wall in the master bedroom. When police went into the garage, they found the door was locked and the key was broken off inside the lock. They noticed that the ground was wet and there appeared to be large bleach stains on the floor leading outside to the driveway. They said the smell of cleaning products was overwhelming. A cadaver dog was brought in and detected the smell of blood inside her residence. Gretchen had had cameras installed in her home a while back, so these were seized and they hoped that something would have been picked up. Some of them had been ripped out of the wall. Despite this, they were confident that the footage could be recovered from the cloud. As they were inspecting the house, a neighbor came running out with more information for them. She said that on the March 21st, roughly between 6 and 6:30 a.m., she heard a woman's voice let out what she called a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like it was coming more from the garage area than inside the house, and the screaming had lasted for about 15 minutes. Another neighbor said that on the March 23rd, they heard someone cleaning inside Gretchen's garage, which was closed up. There was water mixed with an unknown chemical coming out from under the door and into the alley. That same witness said she saw a small black Nissan truck running in Gretchen's driveway, with a tarp covering the back. No one was inside it, but it was definitely out of place. The only person everyone knew to drive a vehicle like that was her ex-husband, David. Jeff, who had been going over and over the text messages from Gretchen's phone and comparing them to other people's texts, suddenly realized exactly who the words reminded him of, and it too was David Anthony. Police called her now estranged ex-husband, and he also said that Gretchen told him she was in isolation, and he was just as worried about her. Then David said something else that was strange. He told them that in the weeks before, Gretchen had said she was fearing for her life, and after coming out of isolation, she might be running away. She had discovered that there was a tax fraud going on in her workplace, and after she contacted the IRS, she was now fearing the repercussions. Definitely a story that no one else had heard. A quick search showed that David had a criminal record, having been arrested for holding up a Blockbuster store with, unbeknownst to them, a fake gun. He was also charged with assaulting a police officer. They needed to find David and talk to him in person. He wasn't working anymore, having been fired a few weeks beforehand, but he wasn't at his mother's home as they expected. Susan answered the door and was happy to help. She showed officers that she had got the same sort of texts that everyone else had been getting from Gretchen, but she had no idea where her son was, and it was possible he was far away. He had packed up his truck on the March 24th and he, along with his dog Kobe, had left without a word. The CCTV footage from outside the hospital was back, and although it was grainy and dark, it showed a very tall person dropping Gretchen's car off in the early morning hours of March 24th. It was definitely not her, and they could only see one person around. David was 6'7", and now they knew what Jeff thought of the texts, as well as David packing up and setting off without warning. It wasn't looking good. On March 25th at around midday, another break came when they could see Gretchen's phone ringing near Pensacola. This was around 600 miles away from Jupiter. If she really was isolating at the CDC Coronavirus Treatment Center, as her text had claimed, she would have no reason to be so far away. They wondered if it was possible that Gretchen was in David's vehicle too, either voluntarily or against her will. One witness then told police she had had a conversation with David on the March 25th via text. When she asked if he had heard from Gretchen, he said, "Ran into her randomly, Sat AM. She mentioned something about going to the beach to ground herself because she wasn't feeling well. Then she proceeded to tell me I should plead insanity on some bogus police charges I've been dealing with." The police needed to delve further into David's past and his prior relationships. David Anthony had moved about a lot as a child and lived with just his mother in Palm Beach Gardens. Friends said the outgoing and loud personality that everyone saw in the gym was not always there. When he was younger, he was very quiet, speaking only if someone addressed him directly. He had very low self-esteem and told people it came from being overweight, as well as being the tallest child in the class. And he was badly bullied too. He wasn't allowed to join the school sports teams and fell into a depression. His family believed he was bipolar and wanted to take him to be assessed and get some medication, but he didn't want to, and threw himself into losing weight and getting physically stronger. Inspired by athletes and basketball players like Kobe Bryant, he changed it all. He made such a transformation that after high school, he earned a scholarship to play basketball. As soon as he was done, he moved into personal training, which suited him well. In 2010, he dated a woman called Heidi for about a year. They met when he offered her a free personal training session. Heidi was 10 years his junior, and although being worried they might not have that much in common, said he was everything she was looking for in a partner. His behavior soon shifted and he started fixating on really small things. He would time how long she took to do something, keeping tabs on what she ate and whether she worked out or not. In November 2010, Heidi walked into her apartment to find David standing there. He grabbed her hand and got down on one knee. Heidi tried to contain her excitement, but what followed was not a proposal. David said, "I'd like to break up with you in order for you to have time to become the person I want you to be." He said he needed to surround himself with successful people that took their health and fitness seriously. Heidi was mortified. A few years later, David would meet Gretchen in the same way. For the first few years of their marriage, Gretchen and David appeared very happy, complementing each other well. But to a lot of people's shock, Gretchen said she had actually spent 3 years trying to leave him, but always coming back to try and make it work. She told her friends that David was becoming manic and would verbally lash out. Gretchen said the good times were great, but the bad times were awful, and she had really been holding on to all the great memories and hoping it would stay that way. The couple even separated for about 6 months, but came back together to give things another go. But his manic episodes seemed to worsen, and by 2018, things reached a scary point for Gretchen. One day, David shot up saying that the world was ending and he needed to go. He loaded up his truck with bags of rice, pots and pans, and 10 pairs of shoes before speeding off, only to return a while later unfazed. Gretchen could see how bad it was getting, but she didn't know how to help him. She described the look in his eyes as crazy and would often lock herself in rooms to get away from him and his outbursts. She texted a friend and said, "I wish him well and hope he learns how to deal with his mental issues. I feel bad that I couldn't help, but I think he needs to learn how to love himself before he can love anyone, something he might not experience in this lifetime." She installed cameras around the house to keep an eye on him, but also to protect herself a little. She sent her boss, Dawn, a message saying, "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed. Then I'll go downstairs and get a knife to put under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully get some sleep." On Christmas Eve 2019, Gretchen went through David's backpack and found her wedding ring, her passport, her driver's license, and her credit cards. After this, she said there was no turning back and decided to end the relationship for good. David moved out of the house and into his mother Susan's, and Gretchen had the locks changed and added more cameras. He carried on personal training, but his co-workers noticed that he was now arriving late and seemed very quiet. David had been previously fired twice for aggressive behavior and was only allowed his job back after persuading the owner Tabitha that he was working on his mental well-being and getting therapy. Tabitha said, "There's no in-between with him. You never know what David you're going to get." Nevertheless, she was happy to give him a second chance. David's behavior became even more erratic when his idol Kobe Bryant, along with his daughter Gianna, and 7 others tragically passed away in a helicopter crash in January 2020. Tabitha said you would have thought he and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it. David would start hysterically crying in front of the fitness classes he was running and have to leave to compose himself. On February 24, 2020, Tabitha had to let him go for good after he failed to turn up at all, leaving clients stood outside the gym. He lost it and started screaming at her. And 4 days after this, Gretchen officially filed the divorce paperwork. Gretchen and David had been separated a while and were now seeing other people. David had even tried to ask Heidi back out, which of course she bluntly said no to. All his dates were ending in disaster, and he even tried to move all his stuff into one woman's house without her knowing or being there. David would turn up at the home that he and Gretchen used to share. He would stand outside shouting about the world ending and moving to Costa Rica. It also came to light that 7 days before Gretchen had gone missing, David was placed under arrest. He was found in a mall in New Mexico after he was seen approaching teenage girls, sweating profusely and acting oddly. When officers got to him, he was nervous and erratic before getting aggressive. All the while his dog, Kobe, sat calmly in the vehicle. David suddenly lunged into his truck, slamming the door on one of the officers' arms. It took 3 officers to bring him to the ground. As authorities started searching David's truck, they found a large knife under the seat, lots of cash, and his passport. They also saw that David's license plate was covered by black electrical tape. David blamed Gretchen's 12-year-old daughter, saying that she must have put it there. He was charged with resisting arrest with violence, but soon posted his $3,000 bail and left. And just days later, Gretchen was missing without a trace. Police still had no idea where either of them were. David was still on the run and would turn his phone on and off periodically, which gave them a small lead to follow. But ultimately, he was just doing this to try and lure police to random places. A be on the lookout, otherwise known as a bolo, was put out for his vehicle, and a call came in from a store saying that someone matching his description had been in to try and sell some women's jewelry. The store clerk handed over the CCTV, which showed David mumbling and saying something about either his mother or his stepmother dying from COVID-19, and that the jewelry had belonged to them. The employee paid David with a check, which he later cashed. Over the next few hours, he went from business to business trying to sell what he could. On the March 27th, his phone indicated he was now in the Texas area, and the following day it showed he was back in New Mexico. Officers there were now on the hunt for him too. To their surprise, David then called the detectives himself. He maintained that Gretchen was not in any danger and was most definitely alive. He said that she had prepared a statement that she wanted him to read. In this alleged statement, it reiterated the idea that she had found fraudulent activity at work and was fearing for her life. Undeterred and not believing a word he said, Detective Kennison and his team continued on with their search, and finally David Anthony was tracked down. To their disappointment, they got word that they still didn't have enough to arrest him, and he was let go again. They were able to seize his vehicle, however, and inside they found 2 Amazon Echoes, some security cameras which had clearly been ripped out, and Gretchen's smashed phone. A cadaver dog immediately alerted officers to the truck, the same way they had reacted in Gretchen's home. The footage was also finally back from Gretchen's house, and one camera outside showed a very tall man standing in the porch area at around 6 a.m. on the March 21st. He very carefully maneuvers around the camera, holding something, but it is not clear what. 10 minutes later, Gretchen could be seen walking into her porch too, and she let out a yell. There was more muffled audio that was picked up by her Alexa. She had been trying to shout to get the lights turned on and attempting to make a call to 911 using it. Unfortunately, her device was not specifically programmed to do this, and no call to police was ever made. Gretchen was then pulled into the garage, which showed the moment she was killed, footage which understandably has never been released. The man then turns around and, exactly as they all thought, it was David. He then proceeds to pull the camera off the wall. On March 30th, a warrant was finally issued for his arrest. A day later, David was in handcuffs and in custody, charged with kidnapping and second-degree murder and awaiting extradition. Kobe was taken to a shelter and later adopted by a new family. Infuriatingly, David was still saying the same things and told Kennison that Gretchen was still alive almost 40 times across the whole interview. Kennison was losing his patience with him and his obscene lies. He knew David and Eva were close and decided to try and use this relationship to get him to talk. Detective Kennison even asked Eva to record a message for him personally. "David, it's Eva. I love you. I'm scared. I miss Mom. I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." But still, David said nothing. Losing steam, they decided to leave him alone for a while to mull everything over. For the next several months, David remained quiet, and police were worried that they might never find Gretchen and bring her home to her family. A grand jury soon indicted him, and he was now facing a first-degree murder charge as opposed to a second-degree one. If found guilty at trial, he could be facing the death penalty. But David had something that they didn't: the knowledge about where Gretchen was and what had actually happened. And a conviction without a body would be challenging despite all the evidence. The prosecution offered him a deal. David finally decided to talk. For days before Christmas, everyone gathered in the courtroom as David's team announced he was going to enter a plea. David Anthony pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and kidnapping. And as part of this, he told them where Gretchen was. According to his plea agreement, prosecutors could not withdraw the plea or seek any additional charges based on what investigators were to find when they recovered her body. Gretchen Anthony was finally found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her house in some woods behind a Walmart. They concluded that she had died of stab wounds to her neck and stomach area. David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison. But few believed his words. One of Gretchen's friends said, "I call BS on that. It's appalling. Absolutely appalling." Police and prosecutors say they can never be sure why David killed her, but they wondered if he had been trying to convince Gretchen to flee with him. And when she said no, he felt he had no choice but to kill her. However, this is all speculative. He is scheduled to be released from prison in 2058. He will be 81 years old. Friends and family say that Gretchen was the most beautiful person inside and out, and you couldn't wish for a more devoted or loyal friend in your corner. All Gretchen wanted to do was move on with her life and focus on her biggest achievement and best friend, her daughter Ava. Her biggest joy in life was her daughter. She loved Ava with every ounce of her being, her sister said. Ava now lives with her father Jeff and Gretchen's mother, and is said to be doing as well as possible given the circumstances. It is a case that leaves more questions than answers, and one that saw authorities travel over 6 states seeking the truth about what had happened to Gretchen Anthony. David had tried to cover his tracks using the confusion and fear caused by the pandemic. But due to the tenacity of those investigating, Gretchen and her loved ones were finally able to get some justice and lay her to rest. Gretchen's friend said, "I think that's the hardest question to ask. Why? And sometimes you just need to believe that there are higher powers in place that have a plan." Beryl Atherton was born in Stafford, Connecticut, but spent much of her youth in Springfield, Massachusetts. In 1924, she moved to Marblehead, Massachusetts with her father, Reverend Warren L. Atherton, when he became the pastor of the First Baptist Church there. They lived in a house on Waldron Street. Reverend Atherton retired in 1931 due to health issues and passed away in October 1937 at the age of 71. Beryl found his body in a chair in their living room after returning home from work. After her father's death, Beryl bought a modest clapboard cottage at 57 Sewell Street in the Reeds Hill area of Marblehead. Having lost her mother before she reached her teenage years and with no siblings, Beryl lived alone. In 1950, at the age of 47 and still unmarried, she shared the home with her pet cat and a white Spitz dog named Esky. Beryl worked as a teacher at Glover School, where she had been employed for 25 years. Her former students would often tell their teachers in higher grades how much they had liked Miss Atherton, even years after being in her class. According to her lawyer and longtime friend, William Lakey, Beryl was plain-spoken and democratic, perfectly good in every way. During Thanksgiving weekend of 1950, a nor'easter struck Marblehead, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Before the storm hit at full force, Beryl ventured out on Saturday, first traveling to Salem, Massachusetts, to retrieve her fur coat from storage at the cleaners. Afterward, she went grocery shopping in Marblehead, buying beef, chicken, pork chops, carrots, tea, butter, a bag of donuts, bread, and a newspaper. She was seen leaving around 6 p.m. as the weather continued to grow worse. It would only have taken Beryl approximately 15 minutes to drive home. Around this time, a local paper boy saw her taking out some trash. He would be the last known person to see Beryl alive. After taking out the trash, Beryl appears to have gone upstairs to hang up her blue suit jacket and change out of her suede shoes in favor of a pair of loafers. She hung her blue skirt over the upstairs banister outside of her bedroom, presumably to let it dry, as it had almost certainly gotten wet from the increasingly strong rain. No one saw Beryl the next day, which was not unusual. Despite being a pastor's daughter, Beryl never left her home on Sundays for any reason. A neighbor would leave a newspaper at her door because she would not even leave to get one for herself. On the morning of Monday, November 27, 1950, milkman Kenneth Phillips was making his normal rounds. It was his routine to enter a Beryl's house by the side door and place her milk in the refrigerator for her as she left home to get to school before he reached her house on his route around 8 a.m. When he looked into the kitchen that morning, however, he saw Beryl there, lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Kenneth ran across the street to get help from one of Beryl's neighbors. Walter Chapman, a retired building custodian, came back to Beryl's home with Kenneth and then called police. There had not been a murder in Marblehead since 18/85. A sense of panic spread through town with the news of the gruesome crime. In the following days, the police department was inundated with calls from women who thought someone was prowling outside their home and requests for police escorts. There were public calls for more streetlights to be installed in town and for more police officers to be hired. The police department suspended time off for all of its officers who were to focus on the extensive investigation into the case. The most obvious injuries Beryl sustained were the 6 deep cuts to her neck, which were the source of the large pool of blood she was found in. She had lost so much blood that it was difficult for the medical examiner to obtain a blood sample from the body during the autopsy. Initial reports stated a cross had been formed by the cuts to Beryl's neck, raising concerns that there had been some sort of ritualistic nature to the murder. However, police later stated that her wounds were too extensive to tell if there had been any attempt by her killer to create such a shape. According to Essex County Medical Examiner Robert Shaughnessy, the wounds were deep enough that any one of them would have been fatal on its own. However, prior to the cuts being inflicted to her neck, Beryl was strangled. Her hyoid bone was broken and there were marks on the back of her neck, potentially from her killer's fingernails. Beryl also sustained 3 broken ribs. Beryl was found wearing a sweater in her slip, and while the fact that she was wearing a skirt or pants seems to point to a sexual assault, the location of the skirt Beryl had been seen wearing while shopping indicated that she had taken it off herself to let it dry. The autopsy found no physical evidence of any kind of sexual assault. However, the fact that Beryl had just been wearing her slip also told police that she most likely had not let her killer into the house, as she would not have answered the door while only being half-dressed. Medical examiner Robert Chauncey stated that whoever killed Beryl had to possess unusual strength in order to have inflicted the injuries he found during the autopsy. However, he did not believe that this meant the murderer had to be a man, stating that a strong woman also could have been the killer. The medical examiner's initial estimate placed Beryl's time of death at some time before midnight on Saturday, the day of the nor'easter. This would seem like a logical time, as the gusting wind would have covered up the sounds of Beryl screaming or Esky barking at an intruder, and the killer could have escaped without being seen, both because it was dark and because no one wanted to be outside in the storm. Both of Beryl's pets were found inside of the home after the discovery of her body, with Esk sleeping in an upstairs bedroom when police arrived. The storm resulted in the power and phone lines being knocked down on Saturday night, so Beryl's killer could have snuck up on her in the dark, and she would have had no way of calling for help even if she had been able to fight her way to the phone. However, those final circumstances were most likely not factors in the crime. After further examination of Beryl's body, the medical examiner refined his estimate for Beryl's time of death to be around 7 p.m., which was also more consistent with other evidence at the scene. When police arrived on the scene, the chicken and the pork chops Beryl had purchased on Saturday evening were in the refrigerator, but all of the other groceries she had purchased, including the perishable ones, were still left inside the brown paper grocery bag. It was raining enough by 6 p.m. that it is plausible that her skirt was damp enough that Beryl could have felt the need to take it off midway through putting away her groceries, before taking the time to finish putting away the rest of her perishables. Furthermore, Beryl's autopsy showed that she had not eaten in some time, meaning she did not have dinner that evening. These circumstances and the medical examiner's estimation meant that Beryl was killed shortly after she arrived home, but not immediately. She had time to take out the trash, put away a few groceries, and go upstairs to remove her wet jacket, skirt, and shoes. The killer could have entered the house while she was out running her errands and waited for her, or could have entered the home after she went upstairs and attacked her immediately. The lights had not begun flickering in Marblehead until around 7 and did not go out completely until later in the evening, meaning they most likely were still on when Beryl was killed. However, there was evidence that the killer had cleaned up following the murder. A damp rag was found in the kitchen sink, and there was no blood on the refrigerator or cabinets, and police found no fingerprints. By the time the killer left the house after cleaning up, the power may have been out, making it easier for them to escape unnoticed, as there would have been no light from streetlights or coming from neighboring homes. Beryl's glasses and her pearl choker, broken presumably during the attack on her, were found on the floor near her kitchen sink. It appeared her killer had grabbed Beryl while she was near the sink, spun her around, and threw her to the ground. Beryl's physical condition would not have allowed her put up much of a fight against her killer. She was 5 feet 7 inches tall, but barely weighed 100 pounds. She was frequently referred to as frail and reportedly suffered from a spinal condition. A broken knife was found in the kitchen with 3 of its pieces on the floor, and its handle, with a small piece of the blade still attached to it, was found in a drawer. There was no blood on any of the pieces, but they were all still sent to the lab for examination. The knife was found to not be the murder weapon. The police thought of several ways for the concerned citizens of Marblehead to help with their investigation. They asked medical professionals to report any patients who presented with cuts, as Beryl's killer may have injured themselves during the murder. Dry cleaners were asked to turn over any garments brought to them with stains on them that could be blood. Several garments were turned over to police, but the suspicious stains turned out to be from wax and not blood. Several days' worth of trash that had been collected to be sent to the dump was sifted through looking for clues. Again, some items with suspicious stains were found, but none of the stains were from blood. Police interviewed over 100 people about the case in just the first few days of the investigation. In addition to standard interviews with Beryl's neighbors and co-workers, police also spoke with neighborhood troublemakers reported to them by Beryl's neighbors, former mental patients, troubled teenagers, and individuals with criminal backgrounds. None of them could be tied to the crime. Despite the massive investigation, police could not find strong enough evidence to make an arrest or elicit a confession, so they had to investigate potential motives for the murder to try to identify their suspect. They looked into the possibility that there was a financial motive for the murder. Beryl only received a modest salary as a teacher but was more financially secure than her income alone would indicate. Beryl owned her home outright, and while she had only received a small inheritance after her father's death, the funds had reportedly been invested very well, and she earned an income from her stocks. Her entire estate was estimated by her lawyer to be worth around $25,000, which would be equal to more than $270,000 today. Beryl had gone to a bank in Salem, Massachusetts to access her safe deposit box after school on the Friday of the week before Thanksgiving. Police had the box opened in case it held any evidence of a motive for Beryl's murder, financial or otherwise. However, the only items in the box were papers relating to Beryl's father's life and religious works. After going to the bank, Beryl had gone shopping in Boston with one of her friends, Georgiana Henderson. According to Georgiana, Beryl had been in excellent spirits during their shopping trip after her visit to the bank. Beryl had visited other banks in Boston and in Salem recently, but police did not believe that these visits were significant. According to Beryl's friends, she had recently seen a report that the state was planning to seize stagnant accounts, potentially causing her to check in with previous financial institutions used by herself and her father, as her only open account was found to be at the same bank where she kept her safe deposit box. Beryl had recently discussed drafting a will with her lawyer, William Lakey, but he did not believe that this was an indication that she felt she had a reason to fear for her life. Rather, she was simply trying to get her finances in order and make arrangements for the care of her Spitz-esque. According to Lakey, Beryl had no relatives who expected to profit from her estate and would have been upset over her making a provision for the care of her dog and her will. Her closest living relatives were her uncle, who still lived in Springfield, and first cousin, Pauline Merrill Apperson, a physical education teacher in Norwalk, Connecticut. Following Beryl's murder, Polly took on the responsibility of planning her services and burial. Beryl's funeral was held on November 30th. All of Marblehead schools closed early that day so that Beryl's fellow teachers could attend the service. It is believed that most of the town's 105 teachers went to the funeral to honor their fellow educator. Beryl was subsequently buried at her family plot in the Oak Grove Cemetery in Springfield. There was one aspect of Beryl's financial situation that remains shrouded in mystery and, therefore, could in theory have something to do with her murder. Beryl maintained detailed financial records. Police found that for more than 2 years, Beryl had written weekly checks to the same individual. The amounts of the checks ranged from $7 to $10, or the equivalent of $75,108 today. Beryl's check stubs noted only the amount of each check in the first name of the payee. However, the name was one that could be used by either a man or a woman. The canceled checks for these payments were not found with Beryl's other canceled checks returned to her by her bank, so police could find no other evidence about who Beryl was writing the checks to or why. Beryl had stopped writing these checks at the beginning of November of 1950, just weeks prior to her murder. The cessation of these payments could be a potential motive for the person who had been receiving them to kill Beryl. Police also considered the possibility that Beryl could have been killed by a burglar who had broken into her home. Both the front and side doors to the home were found unlocked. The side door being unsecured could be explained by the fact that its latch was broken, but police believed the fact that the front door was unlocked as well pointed to burglary as a motive in the crime, as a burglar would have made sure both the doors were unlocked before beginning to rob the home, so as to have 2 ways to quickly escape should someone else come into the house and discover them. However, Beryl's silver collection, on display in a cabinet and valued at $1,000, was left untouched, and police could not identify any items or money missing from the home, meaning that she was most likely not killed by a run-of-the-mill burglar. Police did find a blood stain on a pillow upstairs, an indication that someone had been looking for something. Someone may have come into the house that night to take something, but it was not necessarily for monetary gain. If they found what they were looking for and took it with them, it appears to have been an item that was valuable to them specifically. According to some of Beryl's neighbors, she had essentially become a recluse following her father's death. However, it soon became clear that they had assumed Beryl had no life outside of teaching because they knew nothing about her life outside of teaching. Beryl did have several friends, although many of them were fellow teachers, including Georgiana Henderson, the friend Beryl had gone shopping with in Boston just over a week before her death. Beryl regularly went out dinner with another female friend and was close enough with another to have been invited to her home for Thanksgiving dinner just days before her death. In addition to her active social life with her friends, Beryl was found to have an active dating life. Beryl had never married, but according to her lawyer, William Lakey, she had fallen in love with a businessman several years before her murder, just prior to the announcement of the couple's engagement. However, He met a woman from Maine he found more attractive. Beryl was of course heartbroken at the end of the relationship, but her spirits improved after a few months. Beryl's former fiancé was investigated but had an alibi for the time of the murder. During the course of their investigation, police had broadcast Beryl's picture and details about her murder across New England on television. According to newspaper reports at the time, this was the first time television had been used by the police to ask the public for information about a crime. Police were flooded with calls after the television broadcast, and while almost all of them did not provide any useful information, one of them did open up a major avenue of inquiry. After seeing the broadcast, an accountant from the nearby town of Lynn contacted police. He informed them that Beryl had a very active social life in his town, spending a great deal of time in nightclubs there. According to the accountant, he had seen Beryl off and on from 1946 until 1949. They had not been in a relationship or had strong feelings for each other. He was also able to provide the names of 2 other men Beryl had casually spent time with. Each of the men reported having a similar relationship with Beryl, enjoying going out on a date with her every now and then, but not being emotionally invested in their relationship. None of the 3 men were married, and there were no other factors police could find that would make Beryl's association with them anything but innocent. All 3 men were investigated, but police eventually determined that they were not involved with Beryl's murder. However, while these 3 men were not believed to be Beryl's killer, it remains possible that some other man Beryl was casually seeing was. While police identified potential motives in Beryl's murder, they all remain just theories. The exact motive for the crime has never been identified, as its perpetrator remains unidentified as well. The case has remained a topic of interest for many in Marblehead, but this interest so far has not brought resolution to the case. While the case consumed the town of Marblehead in 1950, and its police department carried out a thorough and in many ways innovative investigation, Beryl Atherton's murder remains unsolved. Marcel came from a large family with 2 sons of his own, 3 brothers, and an older sister, Jacqueline, to whom he was especially close. He also had nieces whom he adored. Jacqueline described Marcel as the class clown, always eager to make people laugh with his goofy antics. He was never afraid to make himself look silly just to brighten someone's day. After moving around quite a bit, Marcel lived alone in a small downtown apartment, which, for the first time in a while, seemed to be working out for him. Marcel had struggled to feel settled anywhere for quite some time, and a big reason for this was the loss of his mother, Evelyn, to cancer in September 2015. Jacqueline, who knew her brother was particularly close to their mother, said that her death had a profound effect on him. Marcel turned to alcohol to numb his grief, and over the months following her passing, his drinking escalated to dangerous levels. Jacqueline noted that he was spiraling, losing control of his life. Although he recognized the situation and tried to regain control, he found it increasingly difficult to break free from his addiction. In early May 2016, several 911 calls were made reporting Marcel's intoxication and aggressive behavior. When officers arrived, however, they determined there was not enough evidence for an arrest, and Marcel appeared to be okay. One of his friends later ran into him at a downtown soup kitchen. Marcel, who was behind her in line, asked to cut in front of her. "Karen, can I jump ahead of you? I haven't slept and I haven't eaten in 3 days," he said. His family knew he was struggling, but not to this extent. On the evening of May 7, 2016, Marcel visited his sister Jacqueline and brother Scott for dinner. The mood was somber, as the aim of the meetup was to put flowers together as a tribute for their mother, something Marcel was finding tough. But the day went as smoothly as it could, and as Marcel said goodbye, they arranged to see each other a few days later for a family barbecue. He told them he was feeling more positive, as he had signed up to a welding course so he could get himself back into work and into a good routine. This was great and encouraging news for his family. He hugged Jacqueline and headed off shouting, "Love you, Jackie," as he went. "Don't forget to call me later," she shouted back. Just a few hours later, Marcel was sadly back on the police's radar again. He was arrested for breaching an order not to consume alcohol, and officers had picked him up in a subway begging people for food. He was held in the lockup for his own safety, and when they were happy he had sobered up, They released him at about 1 p.m. the following day. He left the building in his red sweater, a jacket, and his cargo bottoms. He pulled a newspaper out of his jacket and walked off into town. May 9, 2016. Authorities responded to a call from the Harborview Apartments at 91 Brazil Street. The building's superintendent Jack had called 911 when a resident had alerted him to something near the stairs to the rear of the building. Someone was lying on the ground, almost tucked under the steps, and the resident thought maybe they were sleeping rough and had taken shelter there overnight. But as they got closer, they saw a pool of blood and what looked like brain matter and bone nearby. The man was wearing a red sweater and cargo bottoms, and inside one of the pockets was a wallet. The wallet contained a folded-up birth certificate. This confirmed that they had found the body of Marcel Reardon. He had been beaten to death. There were marks in the mud near his body which showed he had been dragged there, so where he had actually been killed along with the why wasn't clear. From searching his name and working out the last known place he was living, the apartment he was found by had no links to him at all. More frustratingly still, the camera that was directly above where everything had happened wasn't working. Near to Marcel's body, however, they bagged up some cigarettes and a lighter, as well as an empty beer bottle. The chief medical examiner in Newfoundland and Labrador since 1996 said that Marcel's injuries were some of the most damaging he had seen in all his years. So bad, in fact, that his family were not allowed to see him. The wounds were largely to the back of his head and were so severe it was impossible to determine how many times he had actually been hit. But it appeared that a hammer had been used. His blood alcohol level was about 4 times the legal limit. Authorities said they had seen a lot in their jobs before, but this case was particularly gory, disturbing, and draining for them. An officer who had been patrolling the Shamrock City area the previous night said that he had given Marcel another warning for being drunk and disorderly outside a bar. This was at 8 p.m., just over 12 hours before he was found dead. The bar in question remembered him and could also point police to the people he was drinking with, Kevin O'Brien and Jessica Peach. They were actually even still outside the bar loitering around. The pair said they were drinking with Marcel along with a woman called Anne Norris, but they had left him at around 1 a.m. and hadn't seen him after this. They were asked to come in and answer some questions at the station, and they said they were happy to. Both Kevin and Jessica had the same story. On the day of May 8th, they had been walking around the streets asking people for spare change. Marcel soon tagged along with them. At around 5 p.m., he briefly left the group to go and get some belongings, telling them he would meet them later. As he left, Anne Norris joined Kevin and Jessica. Jessica knew Anne fairly well, but Kevin did not. He described her as friendly and attractive, and they got on well. Kevin and Anne went to Anne's apartment just before 8 p.m. before heading back downtown where Marcel joined them. At this point, Marcel was far more intoxicated than they were, being loud and causing them to feel uncomfortable. Marcel had been drinking rum, vodka, beer, and had also taken some unknown pills. He started urinating in the street before falling over and breaking a glass bottle inside his pocket. Kevin said it was upsetting, alarming, and clearly getting out of control. Jessica and Kevin wanted to distance themselves, and they had last seen him at about 1 a.m. The time frame for when he was killed was now getting smaller. So where did he go? Officers asked the pair, and had told them she would get them a taxi and take him to her apartment for some drinks there. Her building was Harborview Apartments. Police now needed to talk to Anne Norris, and to their shock, hers was a name they actually knew, but for nothing even remotely bad. A lot of Anne's life had revolved around sports, and she was called a star athlete by people. She was frequently in the local papers and on the news for her and her team's achievements. She was a former basketball player, having played on the Newfoundland and Labrador under-19s team, and at the Junior National Championships and at the Canada Games. At the age of just 14, she was a top contender for a spot on the national karate team, soon gaining a black belt. She had attended the University of Prince Edward Island, and all seemed to be on the up for her. But now, years later, she had dropped off the athletics radar and things had taken a turn. She had been charged with assault and threatening people and had been in and out of various mental health clinics. They pulled her in for questioning too. She was cooperative and told the police that she had taken Marcel back to hers, but he had refused to go inside as he wanted to carry on drinking in town. She had tried to coax him in hoping they could have a few drinks there and he might just fall asleep, but Marcel wasn't having any of it. He wandered off looking to get into a nightclub. She then went back into town and rejoined Kevin and Jessica at about 3:30 a.m. She said she didn't see Marcel again and was shaken up by what had happened to him, especially as this was just outside of her building. She wondered if Marcel had changed his mind and gone back to hers, realizing he wasn't going to get in anywhere and that sleeping it off was the best thing he could do, that he had been met with someone outside that had maybe tried to rob him, or he had got into a drunken argument that had ended terribly, and was upset and asked if she could leave. Officers didn't have any more questions, so they let her go. Fortunately, the streets were lined with cameras and they were making appeals for anyone that had been in the area at that time to come forward. But no one had seen anything. One camera from outside the bar showed Marcel and Kevin walking about. They were all by the taxis just as they had said, and it was 12:44 a.m. Marcel was wearing the same red sweater and appeared to be staggering and falling over, with and trying to help him up at one point, and then stopped to tell Kevin that she was taking Marcel back to hers, before she and Kevin turned back on themselves, walking away from Marcel. Marcel stumbled into the back area of the bars to some stairs. The pair helped him walk to the taxi and then got into the front seat. Kevin said goodbye to and through the window, and Anne and Marcel both drove off, leaving Kevin at the bar. This confirmed all the timelines so far, and the taxi driver could prove that he had dropped them both off at Anne's apartment building. Kevin and Jessica stayed in town, buying a few things from a shop and bar hopping until about 3:30 a.m. when they met back up with and just as Anne had said. But now she was wearing different clothes, and asked if she could take Jessica's backpack, and she handed it over. By this time Jessica was very intoxicated, so she waited around while Kevin and Anne walked to get some. They ran into police officers and yellow tape outside the front of the building. They had no idea the person they had been with just hours before was lying dead, just a few feet away from them. The backpack was very odd, and it could not be overlooked that Marcel was found at Anne's apartment building. They needed to locate this backpack, and to their surprise they found it pretty easily. Inside the bag was some rope and some light-colored jeans which were wrapped around a hammer. Inside the front pocket they found a wallet which linked to Jessica Peach. How Anne got everything in there without anyone seeing, or if they did, is not known. There still wasn't enough to make an arrest, so detectives placed Anne under surveillance, while a search warrant for her apartment was obtained. They also realized that before Marcel was killed, Anne was spotted hiding another backpack in a dumpster. This contained 2 cleavers, hammer, some more rope, a mallet, and a flashlight. There were also a load of cleaning products inside as well. It was the same hammer that was located in the harbor, and the hammer they now believed was the murder weapon. They finally got the search warrant they needed and entered her apartment, which was almost totally empty. But it didn't look like she was moving out. It just looked like she lived there with nothing in it. The apartment's superintendent, Jack, said she hadn't been there long, a matter of days in fact. He had met her on the May 4th when she applied for one of the spaces. Her social worker had dropped off a check to pay the deposit, and Jack learned that she had just left a psychiatric care facility. When it came to moving in on the May 6th, Jack said Anne was extremely nervous and awkward and had turned up with just 3 bags of clothes and a teddy bear. He said he felt really bad for her, so he got her some couch cushions to sleep on and a blanket to put over her window. Some of the residents chipped in to get her some toiletries too. Jack said she was very quiet and polite, and he was beyond shocked that she could be involved in something like this. In one of the rooms they found a light-colored scarf that she was wearing on the night Marcel had died, and this had specks of blood on it. In her bathroom bin they found something so crucial it would take, and from being a person of interest to the only suspect in Marcel's murder. A Walmart receipt, time-stamped at 10:40 p.m. on the very night she had been with Marcel and just hours before he would have been killed. The receipt showed that a purchase was made for a knife and a hammer. And sure enough, the cameras at Walmart confirmed this. The cashiers described her as odd and her behavior unsettling. It was now the May 13th, and unbelievably, the police that had Anne under surveillance suddenly called the station and said that she had returned to the same Walmart and was browsing the tools section again. Backup was now on the way, and everyone was worrying that there could be a risk to someone in the store. As she was waiting to pay, the police team arrived, ready to place Anne Norris under arrest for the murder of Marcel Reardon. She was soon charged with first-degree murder and didn't try to deny anything and admitted that she had hit Marcel over the head several times that morning, but she wasn't giving anyone a reason as to why. She said she had killed him at her apartment and dragged his body under the stairs before running back into town to meet with Kevin and Jessica, and unbeknownst to them, to dispose of the evidence. Marcel's family said they couldn't believe that and had done this all by herself. Marcel was a big man and they doubted her ability to be able to drag him and hide him herself. But police said they weren't looking for anyone else in the case, and then said it was all on her. A hearing was held to find whether there would be enough evidence to send this to trial, and it was determined that there was. Things moved quickly and it took just 4 hours to select the jury members. The now 30-year-old's murder trial began on January 22, 2018. Despite admitting to killing him, Anne Norris pleaded not guilty and her team was pushing for her to be found not criminally responsible. An expert testified that and had spoken to him and he believed she had schizophrenia. He said that she had seen Marcel as a threat for some reason that night. From what she had told him, Marcel had been sat on the steps outside, possibly even falling asleep or passing out, his back to the door, and, who was upstairs in her apartment, got scared that Marcel was going to hurt her. She grabbed the hammer she had just bought, crept out behind him and beat him to death. He said in her mind she was acting on some sort of preemptive self-defense, but the prosecution were pushing for a first-degree murder conviction. They said the evidence presented showed that she had clearly planned a very deliberate killing. She admitted she had kept hitting Marcel until she was sure he was dead, showing she knew she was going to kill him but continued her attack. They said he was very drunk and incapacitated, unable to fight her off or even really know what was happening until it was too late. And if it was some sort of self-defense, why hadn't she called for help after the fact and alerted someone? Instead, she hid him away and disposed of the evidence to cover her tracks. She had then continued to lie to the police in her first interview. The prosecution argued that the preemptive hiding of the murder weapon and cleaning products had to be questioned. Her father Brian testified that his daughter's mental health had started to decline and deteriorate after she told her parents she was going to the police about several alleged sexual assaults. Upon hearing this, it was the only time that and showed any reaction in court and burst into tears. Brian said that one night she called him, begging him to come home. When he got there, she was hysterical and all the cupboard doors in the house were open or torn off. She couldn't talk, eventually writing on a piece of paper that she had been molested. She said that she had been assaulted by one of her coaches, and this had ended her future sports career. She said she had also been assaulted by her ex-boyfriend, claims he vehemently denied in court. When she reported these incidents to the police, they had big concerns about her mental health and her cases were put on hold. Her father said she had even accused him of assault. She said when she realized it wasn't true, she said, "What's wrong with me? Feels so real." Brian said she was convinced her family were trying to poison her and that people were breaking into her room while she slept. She was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. While in the treatment facility just before she moved into the apartment block, professionals inside said she would go from punching walls and being aggressive to laughing and joking with them. They really didn't know what mood she was going to be in hour to hour. Whilst and had been in the Women's Correctional Facility in Claringville awaiting trial, an informant had recorded a lot of their conversations. In one, and made up a rhyme singing "Goodnight Marcel" and laughing about it. The prosecution were left disappointed when most of these recordings were actually excluded and not allowed into evidence. The judge said they didn't have any relevance and would have an excessive prejudicial impact on the jury. This was a big blow for the prosecution as they argued it was completely relevant to the case. After a month-long trial, it was now up to the jury and people really had no idea as to which way it would go. And Norris was found not criminally responsible. Marcel's brother stormed out of the courtroom as the rest of his family cried. One journalist in the courtroom said the verdict of not criminally responsible was so rare. It really did shock people as so much has to be proven for this to be the case. And alongside her own admissions, it seemed to be quite a strange verdict. Following the verdict, the board had 3 options for those who were found not criminally responsible: an absolute discharge, a conditional discharge, or detention with or without conditions. Anne was placed in psychiatric care, and it will be down to the Newfoundland and Labrador Criminal Mental Disorder Review Board's discretion as to when she is released. Less than 4 months after his testimony against Anne, Kevin O'Brien was found dead in St. John's Harbor. Police said they did not suspect any foul play, noting his addiction problems, saying they thought he likely fell in and drowned. The prosecution filed an appeal against the verdict with the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador, stating that evidence was improperly excluded from the trial. The judging panel found that whilst it was an error to exclude the evidence, it would have no effect on the jury's decision. They also upheld the decision to disallow the audio recording from inside her cell. It was ruled that there was no basis for a new trial. Still fighting at the end of 2019, the Crown then took their appeal to the highest court in the country, the Supreme Court of Canada. But again, it was dismissed right away, and the Supreme Court gave no reason as to why, and has never said what really transpired between the pair, and her defense team say she might not even ever remember. Everybody will always be left guessing. Marcel was laid to rest with his beloved mother Evelyn, lying side by side. Jacqueline said she always looks at a picture that Marcel gave to her. It is of a bridge over a peaceful lake at sunrise. When he gave it to her, he said, "This should remind you that everything is water under the bridge. Just let things go." Something she tries to live by for his sake and memory, but with the feeling of no justice being served, to let it go is a bitter pill to swallow. Marcel's life had been spiraling and he was struggling to claw things back, but he was trying. His family said Marcel would have given you the shirt off his back and done anything for anyone. He wanted to get better for his family, and it is tragic to think that his life was ended. Before he even had a chance to make the changes, he told people he so desperately wanted to. Liam was born into a loving family and was one of 4 children, with 3 siblings, Paige, Madison, and Freddie. He was well-liked and popular among those who knew him, with his mother, Joanne, describing him as happy-go-lucky. Liam had a talent for making people laugh and was always up for fun, never taking himself too seriously. He was also a passionate supporter of his beloved Liverpool Football Club. One of his former teachers described him as having a heart of gold, always looking out for others and showing kindness. Liam was especially close to his grandfather, John, affectionately known as Pops. During his teenage years, after struggling at school, he moved in with Pops. He had a tight-knit group of friends, with his best friend, Reese, being his closest companion. The two were like brothers, spending most of their time together, and Madison described them as inseparable. Having grown up together and attended the same schools, their friendship only grew stronger over the years. Reese lived just across the road from Liam and Pops and was equally close to Pops, often saying he would be lost without him. Liam and his grandfather lived on Gladstone Street, and after moving, Liam introduced Reese to one of his other friends, Jonathan Treadgold. 17-year-old Jonathan's early life had been troubled, and he had spent various times in the care of social services, following drug use and domestic violence in the family home. He was also having run-ins with the law from the age of 14, with a criminal record including threatening behavior and criminal damage. Liam, being the caring young man he was, decided to take Jonathan under his wing and try and be there for him as a friend and a support system. He recognized that Jonathan had various struggles and wanted to help him turn his life around. Joanne wasn't too sure though. She said there was just something about Jonathan that bothered her, and she wasn't keen on her son hanging around with him. Liam's sister had also heard things about Jonathan and his behavior, but she was prepared to put that aside, give him a chance, and judge for herself what he was like. Liam invited Jonathan to hang out with him, on one occasion asking him if he wanted to go to a family party at Joanne's house. Jonathan had far too much to drink and became more and more angry and volatile, culminating in him assaulting someone. Liam was still determined to be there for Jonathan and showcased the same deep loyalty that he showed to all his friends. When he was 17, Liam got news that changed everything. His partner was expecting a baby. Liam was elated, excited to become a father, and throw himself into the challenges and joys of parenthood that awaited him. Reese said that Liam was over the moon. With impending fatherhood, Liam continued to mature, and knowing that it was going to be a monumental change in his life, He began to see his friends less as he prepared to meet his new baby. On July 18, 2019, Liam and his partner of 3 years welcomed their first child, a baby girl. Life was good, and Liam was happy. The August 1st, 2019. It was a bright and beautiful summer's day in Mansfield. On the August 2nd, Liam and his partner were moving to Birmingham with their baby to start their next chapter as a family. Whilst his family were going to miss him and was sad he was moving away, they supported him and he was ready to take the leap. He decided to spend his last day in Mansfield with his 2 closest friends. Liam, Jonathan, and Rees were seen going into a local shop to purchase alcohol before going back to Pop's house on Gladstone Street. They sat in the garden and drank and filmed a series of Snapchat videos whilst there. Liam asked Jonathan if he was going to change out of his tracksuit bottoms to make himself look a bit smarter, as he wasn't yet 18 and he didn't want him to draw attention to himself. Liam said he could wear a pair of his jeans if he wanted to, and after Jonathan got changed, the 3 of them headed off to a nearby pub. As they were walking through the park, Rees received a message. It was from Jonathan's sister's boyfriend, the contents of which are not clear, but it sparked an argument. Rees showed the message to the other 2, and Liam claimed he would hit the male who had sent the message in an attempt to stick up for Jonathan's sister. Jonathan grew incredibly angry and the argument continued to escalate. As the situation got worse, Liam told him if he was going to keep behaving like that, he needed to go away and leave the jeans back at the house. After Jonathan had gone, Liam wanted to try and de-escalate the situation and not have his last day ruined. So they agreed to go back to the house to get Jonathan and try and salvage the rest of the day. When Jonathan arrived at the house, Pops was there in the living room. Liam and Rees got back just 4 minutes later and Liam was keen to try and resolve the argument. Rees waited outside. Roughly a minute later, Jonathan came running out of the house telling Rees, "I've stabbed him, Jonathan," then ran away. Rees immediately went inside, unsure as to whether or not it was all just hot air or if he had actually hurt Liam. When Rees went inside, he found Liam in the dining room. He was bleeding profusely from his chest and holding tea towels there to try and stop it, before asking for the emergency services. Rees called 999 and then gave the phone to Pops for him to talk to the operator. Liam then fell to the floor, and Pops tried his best to help him and administer aid, putting pressure on the wound to try and stop the bleed. When the paramedics arrived on scene, Rees ran out to meet them. They tried to stabilize him as much as possible and treat his injuries. The police were also dispatched, and when they got there, they put Rees into the back of their car. The news soon made it to Joe and that Pop's house had the emergency services outside and that Liam had been stabbed by Jonathan. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead would dispatch more officers as they needed to find Jonathan and find him quickly. They would soon get some important information. The police received a call from the owner of a local sandwich shop saying that Jonathan was climbing over the wall at the back of the shop. He told the owner that he had been involved in a serious incident and had acted in self-defense, lifting up his shirt and appearing to show injuries. The police immediately linked it to the stabbing of Liam and sent more officers over there to arrest Jonathan. At 3:15 p.m., Joanne and one of Liam's sisters arrived at the house on Gladstone Street. The crew was still there and still battling to save him. They had had to cut his chest open and manually keep his heart going. The paramedics decided against taking him to hospital in the air ambulance, as this would have meant they could not work on him whilst in the air. So the decision was made to transport him to the hospital by road. Leah was then put into the back of the ambulance and Joanne was taken to see him by an officer. She told him that she loved him as her beloved son fought for his life. He was then rushed to Queen's Medical Center in Nottingham. The police were still hunting for Jonathan Treadgold, who had run away from the sandwich shop. But then another call came in. The person said he was at a house in Mansfield where his mother was visiting a friend. He had told his mother and her friend that he had stabbed Liam and that Liam was dead. The arrest was caught on the police's body cam footage at 3:33 p.m. He told the officers that Liam had been the one to instigate it and had tried to stab him and that he had acted in self-defense. He was arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. Several hours after his arrest, he was breathalyzed, and even after the time that had passed, his blood alcohol level was still 3 times the legal drink drive limit, so he had clearly consumed a significant amount of alcohol. After getting to the hospital, Liam was taken straight into open-heart surgery to try and save him. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, and after an hour and a half of trying to keep him alive, Liam succumbed to his injuries and died. Liam's sister Paige would later say, "I just remember a doctor walking in with 2 nurses, and I knew then from the look on the doctor's face that Liam had passed. She ran out of the room and had a panic attack." Joanne said she knew in that moment too that he had gone, and that her heart shattered. She tried to call her other daughter Madison, who initially didn't answer. When she answered the second call, she said it felt like a piece of her was now gone too. Madison collapsed, unable to process what was happening. Those in the community could not believe it and were in total shock, and many people shared tributes to him, talking about how he had impacted their lives and just how much he was going to be missed. Joanne thanked the local community for all of their support and love, saying, "Liam was just 18 years old and just 2 weeks into being a father himself. It is with sadness and devastation that he has lost his life to such a horrific crime." A post-mortem revealed that Liam had no defensive wounds, and the pathologist determined that it had been a jabbing motion when he had been stabbed. The knife had pierced his heart. Despite initially being arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm, this was now a murder inquiry. The police began to go through the CCTV footage to piece together the events of that day and try and work out how this had all come to be. They watched the footage of them going into the shop and buying the alcohol. Nothing seemed unusual and everything looked fine. They were then caught walking down the road before stopping in the park. The park was not covered by CCTV cameras. In his interviews, Jonathan said he had fled the park in a hurry after the argument had broken out, in order to get away from Liam, but the footage showed him walking and not running. Liam and Rees were seen on CCTV walking back too. Jonathan was interviewed again, where he now said although he had picked the knife up, he had done so in self-defense, and that he had been waving it around to scare him off, and this was how Liam had been stabbed. But based on what Pops had seen when he witnessed the attack and what was known about Jonathan's past, including a conviction 6 weeks prior for assaulting his girlfriend, his version of events just was not stacking up. The CCTV footage showed Jonathan running from Gladstone Street just 1 minute after Liam had gone into the house. When police searched the house, they found the knife in the kitchen, covered in Liam's blood and Jonathan's fingerprints. Jonathan also alleged in his interviews that Liam had bullied and picked on him for years and showed scars on his body, saying Liam had caused them, but the investigation would reveal the truth. The police investigating Liam's death trawled through the various records of social services, and they determined that the healed scars on Jonathan's body had not been caused by Liam, but were instead self-inflicted. There was nothing to substantiate his claims that Liam had bullied him or treated him badly. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead said he believed that Jonathan was jealous of Liam starting a new life with his family in Birmingham and beginning an exciting chapter when his own life was so chaotic. Based on all of the evidence they had gathered, Jonathan Tredegold was charged with murder. On August 18th, a fundraising event was held to generate funds to pay for a funeral for Liam, raise money for his newborn baby, and donate to a charity tackling knife crime. A GoFundMe was also set up. When his funeral was held, hundreds of mourners lined the streets as his coffin, draped in a Liverpool Football Club flag, was taken into St. Peter and St. Paul's Church. Those following the coffin wore shirts with a photograph of Liam on them, with "Always loved, never forgotten, forever missed" written on them too. Liam's devastated grandfather, who had tried to save his life, paid tribute to him. "Liam, I am missing you terribly. I tried so much to help you, and I lived that day, every day. My best was not good enough, and I am so sorry. I hope you are happy with the angels. Love you forever." The reverend conducting the service told those in attendance, "We need to go away not remembering the manner of Liam's death and the tragedy that it is, but remember the gift of life he was to each and every one of you here, and we go away with the message, bin the knife. We want young people to grow up safe, to not have their lives taken or destroyed." The funeral was a reflection of just how loved Liam was and how much of an impact he had on those he knew. Because he was 17 when the stabbing took place, Jonathan Tredegold was tried as a child, something that greatly upset Joanne. On the November 1st, he appeared in court and entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. He was told his trial would begin the following year. Because of his not guilty plea, the defense requested a second post-mortem to be carried out on Liam's body. Joe said it was disgraceful that he was putting Liam's family through yet more pain and devastation with his not guilty plea. Also, due to his age, there was initially a ban on his name and identity being reported. The Mansfield Chad newspaper made an application for the restrictions to be lifted, and the judge remarked, "That is something I am mindful to do today. It seems to me to be entirely right that today's hearing should name the defendant." And with that, Jonathan Treadgold was unmasked and named in the press. Throughout the trial, Liam's family wore shirts with his face on it, showing that no matter how painful it was going to be, they were going to be there for him and his memory. During the proceedings, Jonathan was disrespectful and disruptive in court. He wouldn't take to the stand, he wouldn't speak, and he would not give any reason as to why he had stabbed Liam, someone who had been a good and loyal friend and really looked after him. Paige said that she could tell from the look on his face that he wasn't sorry for what he had done at all. The evidence put before the court painted a devastating picture. A young man, a new father, about to start a new chapter in his life, taken in a violent and disturbing attack. February 7th, 2020, the jury returned their verdict. Jonathan Treadgold was unanimously found guilty and showed no emotion as the verdict was given. All he said was sound. Shouts of yes could be heard from the public gallery as Liam's family were elated that he had been convicted of his murder. Outside the court, Joan read a statement on behalf of the family. "No family should experience this pain. Our lives have been irreparably shattered. No sentence could ever adequately reflect our loss. We will never see Liam again, hear his laugh, or see our phones flash with an incoming call from him. He was stolen from our lives. Would like to thank everyone who tried to help and save Liam, and we appreciate everything they did." Monday, February 10th, 2020, at Nottingham Crown Court, Jonathan Treadgold was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison for the murder of Liam Gray. Justice Gregory Dixon said this was done in anger, drink, and spite, not in fear. The judge added that he could serve longer than 16 years, as it would be for the parole board to determine whether or not he was safe to be released. And if they deemed that he wasn't, then he would stay in custody. Following his sentencing, Joe said, "I don't think it's long enough, but there's not much more to say. The murder of Liam Gray was a senseless, tragic, and brutal one." Paige said she reminds his daughter of him every day, adding that she gets her personality from Liam. As she continues to grow up surrounded by the love of her family, the legacy of her beloved father will continue to live on through her. The tragedy of this case is best summed up by the words of his mother, Jo, and there are so many things that Liam never got to do. He hadn't learned to drive, been to college, got a stable job, got married, bought a house, or had the chance to parent his daughter and watch her grow up. We as a family have been robbed of watching him do all that too. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.